So this is another segment of The Poison Hill. This is from the middle section of the book, which deals with Gertrude going west to a health spa in Montana, and she meets Frances and falls in love with her. This section is actually first person rather than third person, which is the rest of the novel. And the very beginning, she has kept a diary, or she's trying to keep a diary of her trip. But as often happens when you start keeping a diary after a few days, you start writing and then you kind of stop writing as much, and then eventually the whole thing just kind of trickles to a stop. And so you kind of get that because she can't write about Frances, so she just stops writing altogether. And then she starts over with the first person narration, trying to say, well, this is what happened, and I don't, I'm just going to tell the story straight out. It was just a flash, a glance over the potatoes lyonnaise, a second in which I saw her face, sharp, but waiting, looking around, as if she had something interesting to say. I wanted to talk to her. I wanted her attention, wanted her to look at me. And she did, again, and then I knew she had noticed me, even if she was pretending she hadn't. From that time, from that moment, flowed the most delicious feeling, a feeling of confidence, a feeling that she would come around and speak to me, and I would speak to her, and the story would begin. Every second after that, the feeling grew, and the waiting didn't matter, because I knew it would happen sooner or later. So when I went upstairs and cut the thread off the bathing suit, I stood there for a few minutes, and then I went back down the big staircase. And as I went down, I thought, where are you going? You don't even know where you're going. And another part of me said, it doesn't matter. I'm going to find her. I did find her, and I introduced myself, but it wasn't necessary. We didn't say anything, just walked around the paradise, exploring the colonnaded porches and the rooms where nobody went. After dinner, we went outside into the so-called rose garden, though most of the roses were dying. It was not quite sunset, still hot, and the day had kind of an exhausted feel to it. So after a few minutes, we went back towards the main building across the lawn. Before we'd gotten halfway across, there was a loud hissing noise, and all around us the sprinklers came on. Some of them had metal arms, and others looked like frogs and turtles with water shooting out of their mouths. Frances slipped off her shoes and picked up her dress like a ballerina and sailed over one of the frogs, turning around and laughing. I did the same, twirling my dress around, and then we whooped and whirled and jumped in and out of the streams of water, linking arms and spinning around. There were people on the croquet lawn and people on the porch, and they all came over to look. Mrs. King, whom Mother had made friends with already, shouted at us, "Girls, girls, come inside, quickly." Mr. Lind and Mr. Suter and all the other men were just plain staring, without apology. Frances and I were both in light-colored dresses. They clung to us, rather. Plus, Frances had slipped in the wet grass and taken me down with her, and I hit my elbow, but I was laughing so hard I didn't even notice it hurt. Mrs. King told someone to go get towels, and Mr. Suter roused himself enough to say, "Yes, yes, you might catch cold. That would be unfortunate." He hurried off. Mrs. King said, "Please, girls, try to act like ladies." This made us laugh harder. "I don't think you quite realize the display you're making of yourselves." I didn't care if Mr. Suter and the others saw my legs or my other features. I had them, didn't I? Why be embarrassed? I don't know if I really meant this. You can't change 18 years of training in 1 minute. But I imagined I felt this way. I imagined it was the kind of thing Frances would say. Actually, Frances didn't say anything. She just reached over to the nearest metal head and turned it so the water shot straight at Mrs. King. It didn't hit her, though, and she jumped away. I never knew much about Frances's background. I only saw her mother once, the whole time I was there. She was in a kimono with her hair messed up like she'd been asleep. I knew she was sick, of course. This was why Frances was at the paradise. But there was something about her that was kind of frightening, too. She didn't look at me or Frances. She didn't seem to want to look at anyone. But I didn't think any more about it. I hadn't told Frances much of anything about myself, and I didn't intend to. Nothing from the past mattered now. I did tell Frances about David, though. I can't recall just what I said. It was hard to bring David to mind. Being in love with Frances wasn't a bit like the way it had been with David. With David, all I remember is loving him for so long from so far away. I couldn't share my feelings with anyone, and there was never any joy, never any screaming or celebrating or dancing. It seemed to be all short, cold winter afternoons, wondering, will he come by today? And when he didn't, I'd think, maybe tomorrow, maybe this weekend, maybe I can get Louis to ask him. I never tired of this. If anything, it made my love grow stronger. There was never any happiness either, never any glory. I never saw life tilt before my eyes, full of change and excitement. I never felt free to do anything in the world. I never wanted to be a better person, even, so I could be worthy of it. The thing I realize now is I always thought this lack of happiness was what meant my feelings for David were true love. I thought that with him I had somehow bypassed the excitement stage and gone straight to the underlying truth of what love was. I didn't need to think about love after that, because I'd found it once and for all. And yet all of that true love vanished the moment Frances looked at me. It became nothing more than a rotten bit of cloth, like ragged curtains left in the window of a child's playhouse.